This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my...
King Charles did not simply hand Lady Louise a royal document. He handed her Queen Elizabeth's private estate, every protected room, every acre, every possession linked to Prince Philip, and every right that came with it. Then came the part that left the palace reeling. Camilla had no authority over any of it. The Queen had chosen the granddaughter she trusted most. She had also written a restriction aimed directly at the person she believed might try to interfere. So when Charles confirmed that Lady Louise inherited the estate, Camilla was not merely disappointed. She was furious, because the document proved Elizabeth had anticipated her objection years earlier. That is what made the photograph at Windsor so deceptive. Charles stood beside Louise shortly after 10 that morning, holding a cream document marked with a red royal seal. Louise smiled toward the cameras. Charles looked calm. It appeared warm, dignified, almost ordinary, but the smiles concealed months of pressure behind closed doors. The property was not an empty country house. It held old stables, a private carriage house, protected orchards, barley fields, grazing land, and a locked study filled with papers connected to Elizabeth and Philip. It generated enough income to maintain itself. It could not be dismissed as a burden. It was a living piece of their private world. Camilla believed an estate of that importance should remain under the monarch's household. Her advisors had raised questions about Louise's age, her lack of a full-time royal role, and whether one woman should control possessions carrying such historical value. The argument sounded practical. Quietly, however, it would have placed the estate within Camilla's reach. There had even been suggestions that Louise should receive only selected personal items, while senior palace officials managed the land, the archive, and future access. Camilla expected Charles to accept that compromise. It would preserve the appearance of honoring Louise while leaving the real authority elsewhere. For weeks, she believed the delay meant Charles was considering it. He was not. The legal review had uncovered something no one around Camilla could explain away. Queen Elizabeth had signed a protected instruction stating that the estate must never be absorbed into royal household property, sold for palace funding, or controlled by the reigning consort. The wording was not vague, it was not symbolic, it was designed to stop a takeover. If you are glad Queen Elizabeth made sure Camilla could not take control of what belonged to Lady Louise, do not just sit there and watch in silence. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video now. Because anyone who stays silent is giving Camilla's side exactly what they want, the chance to bury what the Queen decided and pretend Louise was never chosen. Hi viewers, are you happy Camilla was blocked from controlling Lady Louise's inheritance, yes or no? Leave your answer in the comments. Inside Windsor, Camilla received the private summary before the photographs were released. She read the first page quickly, then stopped near the bottom. No reigning consort could manage the estate. No person acting through the consort could influence the trustees. No relative from that side of the family could receive special access without Louise's written approval. Camilla asked who had approved the wording. The answer ended every possible argument. Charles had not added it. The trustees had not created it after the Queen's death. Elizabeth had signed it herself, in the presence of witnesses, years earlier. She had expected someone to challenge Louise's position, and she had prepared the estate to survive that challenge. Louise knew none of this while Charles placed the document into her hands. She believed the delay had been caused by routine legal checks. Then Charles leaned closer and told her about a second envelope, sealed in her grandmother's handwriting. Only Louise could open it. By sunset, she would learn why Elizabeth chose her, and Camilla would learn why she had been deliberately excluded. 3 months before Charles placed that sealed document into Louise's hands, a small legal team entered a locked records room at Windsor and reopened a file that had been left untouched since Queen Elizabeth's death. The task sounded routine: confirm ownership, check the trustees, review the value, then close the file again. That did not happen. The first problem appeared in the property register. The estate had been listed beside other private royal holdings for decades, yet one page carried a separate legal mark. It meant the land had never belonged to the crown. never belonged to the monarch's household, and could not automatically pass to Charles simply because he was king. Someone had taken great care to keep it separate. The estate sat in Aberdeenshire, several miles from Balmoral, hidden behind woodland and a narrow private road. It covered hundreds of acres, but its value was not found in size alone. There were stone stables, a carriage house, grazing fields, a walled garden, and old orchards planted with apples and pears. Oats and barley were still grown there. The income supported the land, the horses, and the small group of workers who had protected it for years. Nothing about it looked abandoned. Inside the carriage house were harnesses marked with Prince Philip's initials. His handwritten notes remained inside a wooden cabinet. Measurements, training schedules, routes through the estate. Beside them sat a pair of worn gloves and a silver-topped whip that had never been placed on public display. Then came the private study. The curtains had remained closed since the Queen's final visit. Her gardening gloves rested near the window. A framed photograph of Philip stood beside a stack of letters. One drawer had been locked, sealed, and marked with Elizabeth's private cipher. Only 2 trustees possessed the authority to open it. When they did, the review changed completely. The drawer contained a second set of instructions. These papers did not concern maintenance or valuation, they concerned succession. They stated that the estate must pass to one named member of the family and remain under that person's sole protection. The name was covered by a sealed strip. Before the strip was removed, word of the review reached Camilla's household. Her advisors raised immediate concerns. Louise was young. She was not a working royal. She was still completing her education. Could someone in that position manage land, staff, archives, livestock, and property carrying such deep royal importance? The question sounded reasonable. But another proposal followed. The estate could remain under the monarch's household while Louise received selected possessions connected to her grandparents. Charles would supervise the land. Senior officials would manage the archive. Access could be granted for private family occasions, charitable gatherings, and carefully chosen visitors. Louise would inherit the memory. Someone else would hold the power. That was the arrangement Camilla expected Charles to approve. It appeared tidy, respectful, and practical. It also would have placed every important decision inside a household over which she carried influence. So the legal team was instructed to examine the estate's finances. The expectation was clear. If the property required heavy support, advisors could argue that Louise had no realistic choice but to accept palace management. Accountants reviewed the farms, the tenancy agreements, the orchards, the grazing income, and a small protected investment fund created years earlier. The results silenced the room. The estate was financially independent. It had no serious debt. It did not need palace money. Its agricultural income covered daily operations, while the private fund protected long-term repairs. The supposed burden was not a burden at all. It was a self-sustaining inheritance, built to survive without Charles, without the royal household, and without Camilla. That was no accident. But one mystery remained. Why had Elizabeth hidden the beneficiary's name beneath a seal when the rest of the instructions were so precise? The answer, the trustees realized, was waiting inside another envelope that had not yet been opened by King Charles. If viewers are pleased that this plan could not be used to pull Louise's inheritance back under Camilla's influence, they should like, subscribe, and share now. Silence only helps those who hoped the estate could be controlled before Louise even knew it was hers. Then the trustees removed the sealed strip. The beneficiary was not Charles, not William, not Anne. It was Lady Louise Windsor. Beneath her name, in Queen Elizabeth's handwriting, were 6 words that ended every argument. This choice is not to be reconsidered. Louise's name on the document did not surprise the 2 trustees who had known Queen Elizabeth longest. They had watched the pattern forming for years, not through speeches, not through ceremonies, through quiet afternoons that almost no one photographed. Long before anyone discussed inheritance, Louise had been spending time with her grandparents in the places where rank mattered least. The stables, the carriage yard, the narrow paths behind the estate. Prince Philip rarely praised quickly, but he noticed discipline. Louise arrived early, listened carefully, and never treated the work as a performance. He taught her how to inspect a wheel before a long drive. He showed her how to read a horse's mood from its ears, its breathing, and the way it shifted its weight. He explained why polished equipment could still be unsafe, why old leather had to be checked by hand, and why responsibility began before anyone was watching. Elizabeth noticed something else. Louise never asked what anything was worth. She asked who had looked after it. She wanted to know which groom remembered a particular pony, which path Philip preferred in winter, why one apple tree had been protected while others were replaced. She remembered the answers. Months later, she would return and ask about the same person, the same animal, the same corner of land. That mattered more than title. One autumn afternoon, Elizabeth took Louise through the old walled garden after rain had darkened the stone. The Queen pointed toward the orchard and asked what should happen to a place like this when the people who loved it were gone. Louise did not speak about money, development, or public access. She said it should still feel familiar when they came back in memory. Elizabeth said nothing then, but she wrote the sentence down. The trustees later found it inside a slim notebook kept beside the estate maps. Beneath the date was a brief observation about Louise's patience, followed by another note in Philip's hand. She understands that land is not possessed, it is kept. That was the beginning of the real plan. Each year, Louise was quietly given more responsibility. At first, she helped clean and catalogue small pieces of carriage equipment. Later, she was shown maintenance records, feeding schedules, and the names of workers whose families had served the estate for generations. Nobody called it training, nobody announced that she was being assessed. Yet she was. Philip watched how she handled mistakes. Elizabeth watched how she handled trust. Louise never carried private stories outside the gates. She never used her visits to attract attention. When friends asked where she had been, she gave simple answers and moved on. Then came the question that settled everything. During one private visit, Elizabeth placed a ring of old keys on the desk and asked Louise which one she would keep if she could choose only a single room to protect. Louise studied them, then selected the smallest key. It opened the archive. She chose the room with no jewels. The Queen smiled. Inside were letters, photographs, riding records, and personal notes that could never be replaced. Louise understood at once that the room mattered because it held lives, not valuables. She closed the drawer she had been shown, returned the key, and asked whether the papers were protected from damp. That evening, Elizabeth added Louise's name to the succession instructions. Sophie learned about the decision only much later. Her first reaction was not celebration, it was concern. She understood the honor, but she also understood the palace. A gift of that scale would attract questions, resentment, and people who suddenly believed they deserved a voice. She told Louise that accepting the estate would change how certain relatives looked at her. Some would see a granddaughter, others would see control, access, and influence. Louise listened. Edward gave different advice. He told his daughter that refusing the inheritance would not end the pressure. It would only remove the one person her grandparents had prepared to resist it. The estate would still exist. The archive would still need protection. The horses, workers, gardens, and private papers would still depend on someone making difficult decisions. Louise asked for one night. By morning, she had decided. She would accept, but nothing would be sold. No room would be renamed after her. No part of the property would become a stage for her new position. She wanted the work to continue exactly as before, quietly and without spectacle. Anyone who respects the granddaughter who chose duty over attention should like this video, subscribe, and share it now. Louise did not chase the inheritance. She earned the trust behind it, while others were already calculating what control of the estate could provide. But the trustees had found one more item. Inside Elizabeth's notebook was a repeated word beside Louise's name. Protection. It appeared 3 times. Charles turned to the sealed letter, opened the first page, and finally understood why. The Queen had not only chosen Louise, she had been preparing her for the person who would try to change that choice after she died. Charles read the first page twice before speaking. The wording was calm, yet every line closed another door. No reigning consort could appoint trustees. No relative connected through marriage could claim special access. No household advisor could remove, loan, display, or relocate anything without Louise giving written approval. There was no room for interpretation. Camilla was told about the clause later. At first, she treated it as an administrative problem. She asked whether the language could be softened, whether Charles could issue a private clarification, whether Louise might be persuaded to accept shared supervision. None of those options survived the legal review. The trustees had expected pressure. That was why Elizabeth had built a second protection into the arrangement. If anyone attempted to weaken Louise's authority, the estate would not return to the monarch. It would pass into an independent preservation trust. Charles would lose control. Camilla would gain nothing. Louise would lose the inheritance, but the property would remain beyond palace reach. The safeguard changed the balance. Camilla argued that the restriction made her look distrusted. She had spent years beside Charles, represented the monarchy, attended state occasions, and supported him through difficult periods of his public life. Now a private document appeared to draw a line around one of Elizabeth's estates and place her firmly outside it. Charles understood the insult she felt. He also understood the warning. The Queen had not written the clause to wound someone after her death. She had written it because she expected the estate to become valuable in ways that had nothing to do with money. Whoever controlled the land would control access to Philip's papers, Elizabeth's private rooms, family photographs, handwritten records, and possessions never shown to the public. That control could shape memory. Camilla's advisors had already asked whether parts of the archive might be transferred to Windsor for safekeeping. One had requested an inventory before Louise had even been formally notified. Another had suggested that the carriage house could support future royal events, with the property presented as part of the monarch's household. Each request sounded harmless by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. Charles asked who had authorized the early inventory request. The answer came back carefully. No direct order had been issued by Camilla, but the inquiry had come through an advisor in her private office. That was enough. Charles saw the situation through his mother's eyes. Elizabeth had understood that no dramatic seizure would take place. Influence would arrive through reviews, recommendations, temporary access, shared committees, and polite requests that became permanent control. Nothing would appear to be taken. Yet Louise would eventually possess only a name on paper. Camilla rejected that interpretation. She insisted the household was trying to protect historic material from being placed under the authority of someone with no official royal position. She questioned whether Louise had the experience to refuse scholars, charities, family members, and senior courtiers who might request access. Charles answered with one fact. Elizabeth believed she did. The disagreement moved from legal language to something personal. Camilla asked whether Charles should let a document determine how his household operated. He replied that the document mattered because the person who wrote it could no longer defend it. Silence followed. Then Camilla asked whether he was prepared to embarrass his wife for the sake of Louise. Charles did not raise his voice. He said the embarrassment would come only if someone challenged a decision that had never belonged to them. That sentence ended the meeting. If viewers are relieved that the Queen's protection stopped Camilla's side from turning quiet influence into control, they should like, subscribe, and share this story now. Those glad Louise was defended should not stay silent while others rewrite Elizabeth's decision. The trustees then read the complete clause aloud. It was stronger than anyone expected. The sovereign's spouse could not supervise the estate. Anyone related to that spouse, but outside the royal line, could not receive priority access. Household officials could advise only when Louise requested it. Even Charles could not replace a trustee without Louise's approval and the consent of the independent board. Camilla asked one final question. Could the clause be removed if Louise agreed? The answer was no. The condition was tied to the inheritance itself. Remove the protection, and Louise lost the estate. Challenge the trustees, and the Preservation Trust took over. Delay the transfer, and the trust could petition the court to complete it without palace cooperation. Elizabeth had anticipated every route. Camilla's anger hardened when she learned that Charles had approved a public presentation. She had expected a quiet transfer of personal items, a carriage, family papers, and equestrian possessions. Something warm, something symbolic, something that could be acknowledged and forgotten. Instead, Charles would confirm the whole estate, the land, the archive, the income, the authority, and the cameras would make the decision impossible to hide. When Camilla saw the prepared document, her expression changed. Louise's name appeared above the words sole beneficiary and protected custodian. There was no shared control, no future review, no place for Camilla at all. The morning of the presentation began without music, ceremony, or a line of waiting courtiers. Charles asked for a private meeting first. Louise entered a small sitting room at Windsor and found the document resting on a table between two unopened folders. She understood at once that something had changed. Charles did not begin with congratulations. He told her the delay had not come from ordinary paperwork. Questions had been raised, access had been discussed. People inside the household had argued that the estate was too important to remain beyond senior supervision. Louise listened without interruption. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Were her grandmother's instructions secure? Charles said yes. That answer settled her. Louise did not ask who had objected. She did not ask whether Camilla had been involved. She did not demand an apology for the delay. Instead, she opened the first folder and studied the preservation terms line by line. Her response caught Charles off guard. She wanted the estate kept as a working property. The fields would remain in use, the orchard would be protected, the horses would stay under the care of the same staff, the carriage house would not become a public attraction, and no private room would be renamed in her honor. She wanted no grand residence. She wanted continuity. Charles watched her sign the preliminary acceptance and finally understood why Elizabeth had chosen her. Louise was being handed land, income, history, and authority, yet her first concern was whether the people and animals already there would be disturbed. That was the difference. Elizabeth had recognized it years earlier. Louise saw inheritance as a duty to preserve, while others privately saw the same estate as access, influence, status, and future advantage. At 10:15, the doors opened. Photographers were allowed into the room. Charles stood beside Louise with the sealed document between them. The setting looked simple, but every detail had been arranged carefully. The royal seal faced the cameras. Louise's name remained visible. Charles held the upper corner, then released it completely into her hands. There could be no confusion about ownership. He confirmed that Louise was the sole beneficiary of the private estate. He confirmed that its income would remain dedicated to maintenance. He confirmed that no part of the property could be sold, transferred, or placed under another household without her approval. Then he added the line Camilla had hoped would remain private. No member of the royal household could overrule the trustees. The cameras kept clicking. Inside another room, Camilla watched the first images appear. Her anger was not caused by the smile on Louise's face. It was caused by the finality of the moment. Once Charles had spoken publicly, any future attempt to revise the arrangement would look exactly like what Elizabeth had feared. Interference. Camilla demanded to know why she had not been consulted before the announcement. Charles replied that consultation had already delayed the transfer long enough. She accused him of turning a family disagreement into a public humiliation. He answered with quiet precision. The announcement was not designed to defeat her. It was designed to end the argument. That only made matters worse. Camilla asked to see Elizabeth's complete letter. Charles refused. The letter did not belong to the king. It belonged to Louise. For the first time that day, Camilla had no reply. If viewers are glad Charles finally closed the door on any attempt to pull Louise's inheritance back under Camilla's influence, they should like, subscribe, and share this now. Anyone pleased that the Queen's wishes were protected should make that support impossible to ignore. But the presentation still had one more surprise. After the photographers left, the trustees opened the second folder. It did not contain deeds to more land. It contained a custodial appointment. Louise had been given authority over Philip's private carriage driving records, Elizabeth's equestrian correspondence, family photographs never released outside the estate, and personal journals connected to their years there. Even Charles could not enter the archive alone. Any request had to pass through Louise and the independent trustees. Historians, courtiers, relatives, even the monarch himself would need permission. The power was quiet. The meaning was enormous. Louise had not simply inherited a place. She had inherited control over how part of Elizabeth and Philip's private story would be remembered. That evening, she travelled to the estate without cameras. The staff met her at the door, then stepped back as she entered the study alone. On the desk waited the sealed envelope in her grandmother's handwriting. Louise broke the seal. The first page explained why she had been chosen. The final paragraph explained why Camilla had been excluded. It began with one warning. You may one day be pressured by someone who believes position creates entitlement. Louise read the warning again, then lowered the letter onto the desk. The words were measured, but their meaning was unmistakable. Queen Elizabeth had not chosen her because she was the youngest, the quietest, or the easiest to guide. She had chosen her because Louise understood the difference between holding something and protecting it. The letter moved through memories the two of them recognized. Elizabeth recalled the afternoons when Louise stayed behind after everyone else had gone, checking the tack room, asking about the older horses, and listening to stories that had never appeared in any official record. She remembered how Louise never asked what could be sold, displayed, or turned into a public attraction. She asked what needed to be saved. That was the answer. Elizabeth wrote that titles could open doors, but character decided what happened after those doors closed. Position could create access, it could not create trust. A person could stand beside the monarch, attend every ceremony, and still misunderstand what private legacy required. Then came the sentence Louise had been dreading. The estate must never become a reward for marriage. Elizabeth explained that future spouses, advisors, and relatives might confuse closeness to the sovereign with ownership of royal history. They might call it supervision, they might call it protection, they might call it practical management. But once private possessions were moved, divided, loaned, or placed under another household, the original meaning would disappear. The warning went further. The land was not to become a retreat granted through influence. The archive was not to become a source of leverage. Philip's possessions were not to be distributed simply to keep peace inside the family. Any request had to be judged by one question. Would it preserve the memory or use it? Louise finally understood why the clause had been written so firmly. Elizabeth had not been trying to create a public quarrel after her death. She had been removing the possibility of one person slowly gaining control through a chain of polite requests. The letter never used Camilla's name. It did not need to. Every restriction pointed toward the same danger, and every safeguard prevented the same outcome. No spouse of the sovereign could claim authority. No outside branch of the family could gain privileged access. No household could use pressure to force Louise into surrendering control. Camilla had the title. Louise had the trust. That was the part no ceremony could change. By the next morning, Louise had made her first decisions as custodian. The barley and oats would continue to be grown, the heritage orchard would remain protected, the horses would stay with the people who knew them, the carriage house would be maintained, not commercialized. No private journal would be released simply because public interest might make it profitable. She also approved an educational program connected to Prince Philip's carriage driving legacy. It would be limited, supervised, and centered on skill, discipline, and service. Visitors would learn what the work meant without being allowed into the family's most private rooms. Nothing would be turned into spectacle. That decision reached Charles before breakfast. He read the plan once and approved it without amendment. It matched the purpose of the inheritance so closely that even the trustees were surprised by how little needed to be changed. Camilla received the same summary later. There was nothing left to challenge. The estate was secure. The archive was closed. The trustees were independent. Louise had accepted the responsibility without seeking publicity, money, or a larger royal role. Any further objection would only make Elizabeth's warning appear more accurate. So the anger had nowhere to go. That silence became Louise's final victory. If viewers are pleased that Camilla could not take control of what Queen Elizabeth deliberately protected for Louise, they should like this video, subscribe, and share it now. Those who believe loyalty should matter more than title should not let this story disappear quietly. And there was one final detail. Before Louise left the study, she found a smaller envelope beneath the letter. It contained a single photograph of Elizabeth and Philip standing beside the carriage house years earlier. On the back, the Queen had written that the estate belonged to the person who would remember them without using them. Louise placed the photograph inside the locked drawer. Charles's document confirmed who inherited the estate. Elizabeth's letter confirmed why Camilla never could. But the next video reveals something even more explosive. Another sealed paper was discovered in the same archive, and this one names the senior royal who tried to request access before Louise was officially told the estate was hers. The date beside that request changes the entire timeline, and once that name is revealed, the palace will not be able to dismiss it as a misunderstanding.